Thank you. So we're going to continue this morning session with a chat and discussion with some, I think, very expert colleagues who are with us, both in person and also remotely, to discuss the issue of regional solidarity. And MSF, I think, recently moved to Sri Lanka. Their regional office is here in Colombo. So sort of a return back to Sri Lanka. And in a sense, the presence of that office here, I think, really is a testimony to the importance that MSF places on thinking regionally, on bringing out regional perspectives and views on the problems that we face. And I think it also raises the very critical issue of regional solidarity. And I just want to say just a quick couple of comments on that before I introduce the speakers. The first is that, all of us in South Asia in particular, we have some common historical experience. Most of us in South Asia, our countries went through 400 or 500 years of foreign domination, imperialism, colonialism. And most of our countries emerged from that experience 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. Of course, and we're going to have a colleague from Afghanistan. I just want to mention Afghanistan, that's a country which has gone through perhaps a more recent exposure to foreign domination, has emerged from that. Now, as we came out of that, we were in a position where we could follow our own destiny. We have to work out what we have to do. And I think as independent countries, as peoples of South Asia, we have to think about reimagining our community as South Asians, something perhaps that existed before foreign influence, but something we have to reimagine again. And I think what this session really is about discussing some of the challenges and opportunities that we have as South Asians in particular to help each other with our shared humanity, help those in need in our region who face very significant challenges. So I think that's basically what we want to talk about. And I have three, we have three very experienced colleagues here to discuss these issues today. I think, first of all, Ambassador Saran is online. Okay, yes. So Ambassador Saran will be joining us remotely. He is a very distinguished expert and practitioner in international relations and in the government conduct of foreign policy, the state conduct of foreign policy. He's a former Foreign Secretary of India, and he served as the Indian Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change. And since leaving government service in 2010, he's headed the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, which is a very prestigious think tank which is focused on economic issues. And he's also been the chairman of India's National Security Advisory Board, which is part of their National Security Council. And he's currently the president of the India International Center in Delhi. So he brings to our discussion today, I think, a perspective on how governments think about problems, about the constraints that governments face, and and maybe he'll share some of the other kind of dilemmas that some of the officials face in trying to tackle these problems. Then we'll have Dr. Farhad Mantu, who's, I think, already been introduced earlier today. Should be well known to us by now. She's the executive director of MSF here in South Asia. And she has a background in, I guess, business leadership and management, anthropology and communications. In addition to helping manage MSF operations here in South Asia, she serves on a number of international committees in MSF and also in other organizations. She's published widely, and she has very specific research interests in the application and relevance of low-cost medical innovations and their use in emergency situations. And she's also, I should mention, part of the global leadership team at MSF. Finally, I want to introduce Hila Najibullah, who is from Afghanistan. She's not a government official. She's not somebody who works for an NGO like MSF. What she brings, I think, is a lived experience of both, I think, displacement and also conflict in her own country. She left Afghanistan when she was quite young. I guess as a displaced person, as a refugee from the conflict, grew up in India, studied in Europe, and has then moved back to Asia and worked extensively here, including here in Sri Lanka with the Red Cross. And she's now back in Europe. She's a doctoral student who's completing her doctoral degree. And she's going to talk to us about her experience as an Afghan, as a member of the Afghan global diaspora, about their concerns and what they're facing, and also the need for regional solidarity to assist them. So, can I ask, Alice, can I ask Hila and Dr. Fahad to come up? I think Dr. Ambassador Saraman is online. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask all of our three panelists to make some introductory remarks. They're going to cover somewhat different angles on these issues, and they're going to talk to about 7 minutes, please. And then I'll have some questions, and then I'll open it up for questions from the audience. So let me turn over first to Ambassador Saran, and I'll let him get on with share his views at this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi. Thank you for your introduction. And I would like to also thank MSF South Asia for the initiative which they have taken to organize this summit, and for inviting me to participate in its proceedings. And I would also like to extend my greetings to all the participants in this particular conference. Let me try and give you perspective from India with respect to this whole aspect of regional solidarity. I think the problem is not that the urgent need for solidarity is not recognized across the board, but there are obviously political barriers, there are psychological barriers which sometimes stand in the way. As far as I can see, the case for regional solidarity is almost self-evident, I would say. Why? Because South Asia is really, to my mind, one single geopolitical unit. It is a space which has very strong economic complementarities, intra-regional complementarities. It is also a space which has a certain common history that Dr. Ravi mentioned. And it is also a shared cultural space. There are very, very strong cultural affinities amongst the people of South Asia. But going forward, also something which has become very, very important is the fact that this is also an ecologically integrated space. And it is very difficult to see how we can really deal with some of the urgent problems of climate change, of biodiversity loss. You see what is happening with the Himalayan range. There is a melting of glaciers taking place. The seas around us, and I think this is particularly important for an island country like Sri Lanka. There could be, as a result of climate change, a rise in sea levels. There is overfishing taking place in the seas around us. There are a number of these kind of challenges where any kind of a national effort certainly is required, but it will be suboptimal. It will not really work. So the need for regional solidarity, regional collaboration is, I think, very well established. But the question is, if it is so self-evident, the benefits are so clear, why is this not happening? And I think it is not happening because, as I mentioned, there are very strong, political issues. There are issues relating to, identity of, some psychological barriers. If you look at this from India's perspective, I think the problem, as we see it, is the problem of asymmetry. You have a space which is dominated by this very, very large country, India, which in terms of its economic capabilities, in terms of its regional resource endowments, in terms of even its science and technological capabilities. It is much more than all our South Asian neighbors combined. And it should come, therefore, as no surprise that as far as our smaller neighbors are concerned, there is almost an inevitable apprehension of possible domination of this space, possible domination of their, way of taking forward their national, economic and social development plans, that this would be dominated by India, that their interests will not be taken into account by India, and that sometimes is the case as well. This causes difficulties. Also, there are large number of spillovers, ethnic spillovers across our borders. So the same people are there on our side of the border as well as on the other side of the border, and that also creates a lot of complications. Also, I would say that with respect to many of the challenges that we are facing, our ability to come together is hampered by the fact that there is a suspicion that these kind of projects might be used in order to undermine the interests of our neighbors. So what is the answer to that? So let me just give you a perspective again from the Indian side. I certainly feel that the very asymmetry that we are talking about, that India is so large compared to all its neighbors, this asymmetry could itself be actually an advantage, because if you take, for example, trade, even if India were to really open out a market to anything which our neighbors can produce and sell, that would still be a small part of the expanding Indian market. If you take, for example, India as a transit country for all our neighbors, our neighbors have connections with India, but they don't have connection with each other because India is in the middle. India could be the transit country of choice for all our neighbors. And if it allowed its, say, transport network to be completely open to South Asian neighbors, it would still be a very small, load on the Indian transport infrastructure. India could actually position itself as the engine of economic growth for all our neighbors. After all our neighbors are looking for opportunities for economic and social development. Today, India is one of the emerging countries which is growing the fastest in the world. It is a huge market. It has, as I mentioned, a number of capabilities. If it was able to just give access to each of its neighbors to what it is able to offer as an engine of growth for the region, that itself, I think, would be a very great contribution. And lastly, in terms of what was mentioned about the need to face disasters, the kind of challenges that we are facing, again, I think India has shown that whenever there has been some kind of natural disaster, India has been able to, on a bilateral basis, offer assistance. When the pandemic took place, India was a large producer of vaccines. It was able to supply vaccines to several of our neighboring countries and beyond. So there are those capabilities which India can actually contribute in terms of meeting these kind of disasters, but better prevention rather than having to deal with these issues. And that prevention requires, as I mentioned to you, collaboration on the ecological front. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll come back to you with some questions, but let's move to Dr. Farhat. I think she'll share some comments about, I think, the humanitarian dimension of regional solidarity, and also, I think, share some perspectives coming from the MSF experience about what that means and what needs to be done. Over to you.
Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, Ambassador Saran. An organization like MSF that's based on sans frontierism philosophy. So that would mean that borders is something that is but natural, that we would be working in all the areas in South Asia where we would be touching on borders on either side of the country. South Asia, is it a bloc? I think that is the question we have to ask ourselves. Historically, South Asia is a region which shares a shared culture, a shared history. But does it have cohesion? Cohesion when it comes to dealing with issues of humanitarianism. What we see from a humanitarian point of view, I'm going to divide it into three parts. The first bit is what our experiences are as a humanitarian organization in a world which is more fragmented than ever, where the traditional peace brokers are losing a part of its legitimacy to have influence in the global south. So, coming back to the first point, which is talking about what does it mean for a humanitarian organization to operate in South Asia. The countries in South Asia underpin any humanitarian assistance and dialogue based on bilateralism and based on the principle of non-interference. So that would mean that if we would like Pakistan to talk about Afghanistan ban, if we want to talk about Rohingyas in India, if we want to talk about Tamils in Sri Lanka, and we would like to see that the nation countries of South Asia would express solidarity and influence. That has been for us an area which is the diversity in itself doesn't enable that. The other bit which I feel is important is how solidarity is expressed in South Asia. As MSF, we have seen that so going back to us and our origins as an organization, around the world, one of the things that we do apart from medical action is to bear witness. And we bear witness in home society. For us, South Asia is a home society. And a society that is as diverse, where, let's take the example of Gaza. We wanted to engage bilaterally with the governments of South Asia. We know that within South Asia, there are countries that do not have a diplomatic relationship with Israel. There are countries who have a certain amount of influence. So we had to have a very tailor-made approach of how do we try to influence the various stakeholders, the countries in South Asia, to bring their influence at the international fora, and which in itself talks about something that we have to actually look outside South Asia to talk about what is happening in South Asia. And an ideal dream would be when we would have countries in South Asia actually talking about South Asia. The challenges of speaking out, the shrinking space in the society to express solidarity is also very, very meager when it comes to engaging. Because let me take the example, how freely are we able as an organization to talk about our experiences in Myanmar, India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, when it comes to people on the move? How easily are we able to talk and criticize about what we experience firsthand in countries on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan and Iran? So by default, our operating model is that we will be in those places. So we will be experiencing things where we will see shared ethnicities but divided by borders. So how do we as an organization navigate that space that stays as a big challenge for us? I have a couple of more points and I think I have some time, so I'm gonna refer to them. It's also to be seen what is our role as an international medical neutral actor. Neutrality would mean that we are dealing with actually the consequences of what we are seeing, not attributing blame to either of the parties. So when we do so, how do we really make sure that others in the space pick it up? So far, over the years, our experience in South Asia has been that it is very easy to talk about what is happening beyond South Asia in South Asia. But when it comes to talking about South Asian countries and their experiences in the humanitarian crises, the space to hear, the space to engage, and the space to criticize is limited. And how do we engage? There is not a set mechanism. Say, if we have our office in UK, we would go out and openly talk to all the legislators and ask for a change in the way UK can make influence of what is happening in Yemen, as an example. Or we know that countries in South Asia also have influence. How that influence is not leveraged outside South Asia? How do we make sure that is leveraged inside South Asia? That still stays as a challenge for us. South solidarity. I'm talking about a geopolitical term here. I'm not talking about who is below or above the equator. When I talk about it, in last 1 year, we have seen that the growing conflicts around the world has generated a lot of South-South solidarity. And what role does MSF see of South Asia in that is something that we would like to kind of explore a bit more. But I will come back and give floor to Hila.
Thank you, Dr. Farhat. So yes, let me hand over to Hila, who's, I think will talk about the Afghan experience specifically, and I think drawing on, I think many years of research is also done on the situation in Afghanistan, the conflict situation, and the challenges of that. So over to you, Hila.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. I thank MSF for giving me a platform to come here and raise my voice. As a woman that comes from a country representative of half a population of a country that is silenced. I'm also grateful to be here as a mother and as a daughter and as a sister. For me, the issue of migration and women have been very close to my heart. As a humanitarian worker, I have focused on migration issues, but it's been close to my heart because I was uprooted as a teenager because of civil war. Mostly the people who got out from my family were women. It was my grandma, my mother, and my two sisters. I was raised by women. The men were killed. And I remember when I lost my family members, usually, what I mean is the men, my grandma came up to me and said, "It's time, Hila, to stand on your feet." I was in last year of high school and I was crying saying, what am I going to do? I can't finish my A-levels. And she said, well, you need to survive, you need to fight, and you need to be independent to live in this world. This is what the men of the family would have wanted you to do. You don't have a choice. I was a privileged one, and I'm still very privileged because I was out of Afghanistan. I was privileged because I had access to education. I was privileged because financially my parents could provide that education, my mother and my grandma, for me. Today, as Ms. Kumaraswamy mentioned, Dr. Gill mentioned, and so many of you, the cases of Afghan women who've been forgotten, who've been silenced. From grade 6 onwards, girls are not allowed to be educated. In the past few years, we haven't had graduates from high school or entries into universities. And also, employment is banned for many women, depending on which provinces you are in Afghanistan. There is a high level of poverty. United Nations reports indicate that 9 out of 10 Afghans are poor. Women make a large number of this population. We have enough widows in Afghanistan who are single-headed family, and they must earn to support their children. This is not happening in my country right now, unfortunately. Another anecdote or a story that I would like to share of is this lady called Islam Bibi, who is from province of Nangarhar in Jalalabad, whose husband had an accident recently, and she had to take loans of around $7,000 to treat him. But she cannot pay the debt. So she's resorted to sell her 6-year-old daughter in marriage. UNIFEM suggests that there's been an increase of 25% in child marriages in Afghanistan in the past 3 years. When you don't have education for girls, when you restrict them from movement, when you don't give them the choice, and women to be able to, their mothers, and to earn and have a say, basically what we're doing is exactly annihilating and erasing half of the population from the Afghan society. Now, I am saying all these things, and the consequences of this, as we spoke about reproductive health, or what Priyali talked about, Myanmar refugees not, the children not having access to education. We can see as humanitarian workers the consequences of what could happen. But what is also extremely alarming is the increased number of madrasas that are, coming up in Afghanistan. More than 6,000 in the past 3 years. During the Republic, 1,000 of them were registered. So if you have a society where women are restricted, men are made responsible if the women not abide to the rules of Sharia or the Taliban, when the poverty is so high that families are given $200 to $250 to send their children to madrasas, I don't know how we could prevent a crisis, not only within Afghanistan, but across the borders as well. Now, why am I mentioning all of this here in terms of regional solidarity? Afghanistan is a member of SAARC, and it is also geographically located in a very strategic position that connects Central Asia, South Asia, and China. We have been target of many stakeholders in Afghanistan because of their geopolitical rivalries. And this is ongoing, including the issue of women. Sadly, what I saw after the Taliban forced takeover was not a single statement by feminist networks in South Asia. What I did not see was an open door policy for girls to continue their education. On the contrary, Pakistan's then Prime Minister, Imran Khan, asserted the fact that it was our culture that we did not educate women, which was far from truth, because in 1919, we had a constitution that empowered women when Pakistan did not even exist. Meanwhile, India canceled all the visas for the 2,000 Afghan students. Sri Lanka did similar with restricting visa issues. And I can thank MSF for facilitating my visa to be here. So if we're talking about regional solidarity in a situation where women are completely wiped from the society and participating in any kind of future say as to what could happen, not even politically, but in their own lives, so they can be in charge of their own bodies. How can we ally? My suggestion or my request or plea to many governments in the regions and also networks that work on women issues is the fact that it's time that you promote education, that women are given opportunities, while the Taliban getting tighter and tighter in terms of passing laws on women, that their future is not taken, that the hopelessness does not resort into growing number of suicides, that young girls are not sold in marriage, that women outside are not told, oh, well, just because you're outside, you don't know what's happening inside, and therefore you shut up. It is extremely important if the women, which is the core of love, humanity, and empathy in our societies, are not given a chance, that tomorrow the radicalization in Afghanistan could become an extremely alarming situation for the region at large. So the other thing I would like to say, that there's this perpetual state of injustice, regime and government after government, despite of the Republic and the Americans being there. And what the Afghan people at large are feeling is that the culture of impunity dictates in the country. And as human rights activists, as humanitarian workers, we should not shy away in pinpointing the Rome statutes that were mentioned this morning, Geneva international laws that are binding, the ICC, for example, because who rules Afghanistan now and who ruled Afghanistan before as well were criminals. And this is why my people cannot stand up, because they are constantly handed over to a group of war criminals. So we must, as society that want to promote humanity, uphold accountability, and push for this transitional justice and the future transitional and future discussions on the political settlements of Afghanistan. And I urge that governments could be open to ensure that there are fellowships and scholarships for Afghan women to continue their education while the changes eventually happen in the country. It would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Hila. I think for sharing your heartfelt views and experience and reactions to what's happening in Afghanistan. I want to now just quickly turn to Ambassador Saran. I think you mentioned and discussed, I think, the need, the relevance of regional solidarity and the opportunity for regional solidarity. Can I ask you just to make a couple of comments about, in very concrete terms, what is it that we could do more to advance regional solidarity in this space? And specifically also, do you think there's a difference in what governments should be doing and what civil society and people should be doing? Or is it the same? Over to you, Ambassador.
Well, to answer your question, I think there is certainly a difference between what states can do and what societies can do. There will be issues on which perhaps societies are aligned together with what the state does. And there are occasions where perhaps they are not aligned. So if you take the issue of what was mentioned by Hima about the visa issue. if you take the position of civil society in India, I think they were very clear that, in fact, India should be very open and welcome, Afghan brothers and sisters into India, and certainly, enable them to take advantage of, say, educational opportunities in India. But there was a different kind of perspective as far as the state was concerned. Worried about how large a number of people might come in, and what would this mean in terms of the state's responsibility to take care of people. There are sometimes other considerations which come into play. So that is no reason why civil society should not raise its voice and try to influence government policy. This is certainly easier in a democracy, and I think in India, the opinion of civil society, of what happens in parliament, does influence government policy as well. So I do not see necessarily a kind of a polarization between society and the state. But there should be, certainly, I think, in terms of the kind of solidarity that the MSF is involved in. Civil society can play a very important role, because civil society is actually a very active player as far as our countries are concerned. With the state, sometimes there are difficult choices to be made. So let me take the example of Afghanistan. Should India engage with the Taliban regime or not engage with the Taliban regime? That's a dilemma which the state faces. Now, one of the reasons why it was felt that maybe there should be some kind of an engagement with the Taliban regime in Kabul is that, would it allow us to continue with the assistance that India has been providing with respect to, say, health, or with respect to some of the other humanitarian projects that we are involved in. That kind of limited engagement, we have not recognized the Taliban regime, but that kind of limited engagement has opened the door for being able to extend assistance, which we could not have if we did not have that engagement. So sometimes there are difficult, choices to be made. Certainly there should be some kind of a regional solidarity with respect to meeting some of the health disasters or climate change disasters which take place. But as I mentioned, even if we can't do this on a regional basis, can we at least do this on a bilateral basis? And I think one does not exclude the other. So if it is possible for, say, a country like India, which has larger capabilities, to be able to assist our neighboring countries with, for example, vaccines when pandemics hit, as we did, or to offer assistance when natural disasters strike any of our neighboring countries. Most certainly, I think one should welcome that, even if on a regional basis we are not able to do this. We are not able to do this on
Thank
a
you.
regional basis because there are political
Sure.
barriers.
Thank you. I want to just thank you, Dr. Ambassador. I want to now turn to Dr. Farhat. I think you heard from the ambassador some of the constraints that governments face, or dilemmas, whether we like it or not, and that there's space for civil society, but also there's a role, particularly in South Asia, for civil society to also influence what governments do. That's also an important function. As a South Asian actor, MSF South Asia, what do you think MSF should be doing, or people like you should be doing, based on your own experience? And I have one little additional comment, query. You mentioned the difficulty of engaging, I think that's what I understood, with South Asian politicians or leaders, if I understood correctly. Is that really different to the rest of the world? Because, if I went to Germany and to the Bundestag, and I wanted to engage with them about the Germans supplying weapons to genocide in Gaza. Or if I went to Congress and wanted to talk about American complicity in genocide, I would be shown the door. And I'll probably have my voice silenced, right? Or I will not be given a visa to go to Germany. This is happening. So is there really a difference between South Asia, or is it just that we're like every other country? We have our complications and we have our limitations. We're just all human at the end of the day. Over to you.
Okay, let me start with the last bit of it. It is bilaterally engagement one-on-one in a certain country. We would have similar experiences that our colleagues could have in Germany, Japan, Australia, Hong Kong, and some places we do have opportunities to brief the policymakers, the influencers, the politicians about what's happening around the world, purely based on what we witnessed on the ground. But I was referring to it when we look at South Asia as a bloc. And that is where the diversity of each country plays into not having a kind of blanket strategy of engagement in the region. So that was what I was referring to. Let me come back to something. I'm going to talk about COVID. Is something that doesn't need anyone's introduction. So a global pandemic that taught us that how much it is important that we cannot seal our borders. We will have to engage with the rest of the world. And how much your neighbor can help you or harm you also depends on how you engage with them. Ambassador Saran spoke about climate crisis. That is really staring us in our face in South Asia. Let us not undermine it. We talk about Mpox this time. It is a public health emergency of international concern, but maybe has not touched South Asia yet, but actually has, because we had officially one case kind of identified in Pakistan. These examples, what I want to illustrate through these examples is that we cannot choose to close our eyes just because it's not affecting us. So we really have to look at how, as humanitarian civil society actors, do we play a role? So for me, there are a few things that I do believe are important to share. With my limited knowledge of this context, I would say that this region had some visionary ideas. As back as 1970, when Bangladesh just got independence, they put a proposal of setting up a multilateral body called SARC, which was formed in 1985. I think people-to-people solidarity is quite critical. Irrespective of how bilaterally nations in South Asia are engaging with each other, we have to see how we, as civil society members, as people who are holding think tanks, as people who are sitting in positions of power, how are they able to engage to revive some of these multilateral bodies, which would be a place where you talk about cooperation a lot. The leadership of South Asia. I think when I speak about the global South-South-South solidarity, where does South Asia place itself? I think it's a very valid question to ask ourselves. We had South Africa coming forward to put a case in the International Court of Justice and ICC and taking a position. And there were many countries that came forward which are kind of in this geopolitical term classified in the global south. They expressed solidarity on something that was of an international concern of humanity. So what is the role of South Asia in that? I think we could have a bit more inwards look into looking at it. Last but not the least, I do believe that we as humanitarians, we as civil society would always be dealing with the consequences of it. How do we really make sure that while we are treating the symptoms, the cause is also being addressed? So how do we normalize some of the conversations? Very real examples about people-to-people contact. How does civil society play a role in mobilizing the kind of foreign policy positioning? Maybe there is time to look at reviewing the principles of solidarity. When we talk about that among South Asian nations at a more political and policy level, we should be asking about it. And I think that is a part of civil society. You bring attention through the work you have witnessed, the lived experiences you have, and say how a country can be more futuristic and play a more prominent role, not only at a regional level, but also at a global level.
Thank you. I just want to touch on one point about that you mentioned about MSF. I mean, it is a challenge for MSF, and we heard from even the previous panel. You see in your own witness these problems which have underlying causes, and of course, all the people working in MSF, they think about those underlying causes, but there is this dilemma: do you deal with the symptoms or do you deal with the challenges? I think, to be honest, MSF has played a very critical role in dealing with the symptoms. Somebody has to do that. At the same time, it makes it difficult sometimes for you to talk up and discuss the causes because of the political sensitivities in the places you have to work. I mean, do you want to just comment on that? I mean, how you manage that dilemma between talking about things you know about, but talking about those causes as opposed to just dealing with the symptoms?
I think as an organization, we don't need to do the talking always by ourselves. And we believe there are other actors who are better placed, have better expertise to talk about and taking what we experience, our direct witnessing from the field, to be taking those data, those facts, and bringing it to other levels. So what we rely on is the ecosystem. And that, as MS of South Asia, we want to build. We want to build an ecosystem where we know that we are one small part of this ecosystem and we go from A to B, but somebody has to take it from B to Z. Yeah.
Thank you. But it has to start with witness, and I think that is a very important role you play, but your silence doesn't mean that you don't care. It's just, I think what your message to everyone here is, it's part of that wider ecosystem. They have to take that forward in terms of addressing underlying causes. But you play a role in that.
I just would like to allude to one thing. MSF as a structure, as an organization, we talk about bearing witness. 53-year-old organization, a certain amount of privilege. But this is bearing witness. This is somebody who's bearing witness because she is living this. So I think we also have to find ways. How do we amplify? How do we complement what Hila is talking about? And how do we really make sure it doesn't go lost into the number of things we are experiencing around the world?
Thank you. So finally, I just want to hand over to Hila. I have just a question. I mean, you discussed and you mentioned the tragic situation in Afghanistan, the I guess the increasing suffering and problems that are occurring now in Afghanistan. But what can we do in South Asia specifically, maybe at the civil society level? What can we do to help share our humanity with the problems, with the people in Afghanistan?
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. So Ambassador Saran brought up this whole issue of engagement. Now, the first time I heard the word engagement was about a year and a half ago in Brussels by the EU, and at a platform of women representatives, Afghan women representatives. And one of the first questions that came out, what do we mean by engagement? And can we as Afghan women determine and come up with a position paper as to what that engagement could be? Now, interestingly enough, we did come up with a position paper. We did our homework and we did it very good, I believe. But it was put aside, right? So my question to Ambassador Saran would be, when he engages with the Taliban, would he be able to get scholarship for women to come to India and study? Could Sri Lanka do this? How can you ensure that happens? Or at least for them to finish their high school? So this is one aspect in terms of what can South Asia do in terms of civil society to bring up these issues. The other thing is that this notion of a political settlement in Afghanistan. I believe in dialogue. I believe in negotiations. I believe in peaceful means of legitimizing a government in Afghanistan that is people-centered. But if you have an entity that does not want to negotiate that basically has been passing laws one by one against women and their own people, even though the argument is, oh, they brought peace. But hello, they were the ones who were fighting and killing people. So now they're in power and they stopped killing people. But their policies are such that is annihilating opposition, that is erasing women, that is getting rid of the old members of ANDSF. What exactly is our message to the UN when you go to the, as a representative of your governments, to talk about political settlement in Afghanistan? You know, so for me, it's extremely important that in the region there needs to be a discussion, and in line with international law, with peaceful means of finding a solution and building consensus amongst the stakeholders. That's something you can do for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing those comments. I don't know whether we have time for questions or no. Okay. So thank you very much for, I think, for sharing your experiences and your views, and also Ambassador Saran for joining us, I guess from Delhi, I guess that's where you are, and for sharing your kind of the official experience from the official side of some of these challenges.
I am not on the official side.
But yes, but from your past experience. Your experience from that side, yes. Thank you very much. And so, yes, I'll end the session. I think we don't have any more time, and my apologies for extending it a bit longer, but I hope all the panelists got a chance to share and we all learned from them. Thank you.